Welcome to the discussion. My guests today are Ram Iyer, the Chief Data Officer for the Food and Drug Administration and the Department of Health and Human Services, Hannah Hunt, the Chief Product and Innovation Officer for the Army Futures Command's Software Factory, Venus Goodwine, the Chief Information Security Officer for the Department of Agriculture, and Juliana Vida, the Chief Technical Advisor for Public Sector at Splunk. Welcome everyone to the discussion. Let me set a little context for our conversation today. For much of the past decade, agencies have been talking and doing a lot around IT modernization, but the pandemic highlighted both how far many agencies had gone and how much progress they still have to make. The last 9 months has been both a good news and a bad news story for sure. Agencies now must sustain this momentum gained from these efforts to meet the surge of remote workers. How they do that is having the ability to monitor and manage these transformations to ensure mission success. This could mean gaining a better understanding of what applications, systems, and data are in the cloud and how they're responding to employee and citizen needs. This could mean expanding the use of DevSecOps to deliver capabilities more quickly. And this could mean harnessing your data to make better security decisions that's going to help drive your agencies toward better mission outcomes. And with most things, all this comes back to the data, having the right data, understanding what that data means, getting the data to the right leaders to make the right decisions. So how can agencies continue their digital transformation journey, take advantage of that data, and improve mission delivery? Well, that's where our panelists come in. Let me start with Hannah. Digital transformation, it's a big buzzword. We've heard a lot of really great stories about the pandemic and how agencies have really taken on this sense of urgency, made progress. Let's talk about the Army Futures Command. How have you guys kind of really pushed forward on digital transformation and talk a little bit about the pandemic and how it's impacted your progress?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Army Futures Command was set up about a couple years ago, really to bring that modernization to the Army. It's comprised of cross-functional teams that work with the program executive offices from an acquisition perspective to bridge that gap and bring that modernization. Within the software factory within Army Futures Command, we're really focused on upskilling soldiers and enabling them to deliver software that solves soldiers' problems. How the pandemic has changed that is we've been able to execute still. There's the DoD rolled out the CVR platform through Microsoft Teams, which allows us to interact, across the board, across multiple customers and engagements. And that has been a huge lifesaver because a lot of, before that, we were stagnant and unable to have that flexibility. From a digital transformation perspective, there's so much going on in the Army right now. The Enterprise Cloud Management Office through the CIO is emphasizing cloud modernization and bringing cloud native technologies to the Army. And we are, lockstep with them to ensure that any software that is developed through our software factory is enabling that digital transformation through cloud native development, DevSecOps, as you mentioned, user-centered design, all the things that are really important to deliver those awesome capabilities that our soldiers need.
It's interesting. We've heard the stories about CVR and the success that it has made. From a digital transformation perspective, a lot of people have said that I've talked to in DoD, this would not have happened as quickly, as smoothly, if you will, if the pandemic didn't happen. Can you say that also around other things that you've worked on with the Army Futures Command Software Factory?
Yes, absolutely. We are really in a time where the pandemic has demonstrated that we are not equipped to be able to execute quickly. And so we're building processes and policies that enable us now to deliver capabilities in such a rapid way and securely too, so that we can get those capabilities out in the field. There's multiple techniques that we're using, like coding low and deploying high, to allow us to be able to work remotely and actually still code. There's a ton of different security ideas. The continuous authority to operate is something that's proliferated in the Army now, started really with the Air Force. And we are taking that as a way to say the processes that we do to develop software and deploy that software is secure by nature. And therefore, I don't necessarily need to get an authority to operate for every single piece of software that I develop. I just need to certify the process.
I love that, coding low and deploying high. That obviously is a security reference there in case if people weren't sure about that. Do I have that right? I thought I better check.
Yes, yeah. So, coding in an unclassed environment and then coding up into, various levels of classification.
All right, very good. Let me bring in Ram from FDA. FDA has been under just a ton of pressure, a ton of focus to really deliver during the pandemic as well. Let's start with your digital transformation strategy. I spoke with your acting CIO, Amy Abernathy, a few months ago, and I know you guys are making a tremendous progress.
Sure. Thank you, Jason. FDA recently celebrated a one-year anniversary of its Technology Modernization Action Plan around September of last year. The TMAP was designed as a blueprint for the agency's digital transformation. It has three important components. The first one is the modernization of FDA's infrastructure and operations. It's an important part of our foundation. Enhancing FDA's capabilities to develop technology product. So we wanted to move from a project mindset to a product mindset. And then the third item is, or the third objective was to have the communication and collaboration with our stakeholders to drive technological progress that is interoperable and it helps the public health mission. So we have embarked on this journey, and what the pandemic has done is it's really accelerated and moved the needle incredibly fast because of the various drivers and the needs of the pandemic. But just one example is we've taken an all hands on deck approach through initiatives like an evidence accelerator that Regan Udall Foundation and the Friends of Cancer Research had started, and FDA is an active participant there, along with our existing programs like Sentinel, BEST, and NEST, to put our real world data to work. So it's been a very important part of our digital transformation story and also a data story. It has also increased our understanding of the breadth of ways to use these data sets, and then how the data modernization as well as the technology modernization go hand in hand to meet these objectives. The data, as you said, is a critical part of all of these journeys. So the technology modernization is highly connected with our data strategy as well.
And I know, Ram, you recently joined the FDA recently in the last 6 months or so as somebody who is the chief data officer. Walk me through a little bit about your role and how you're kind of connecting the dots between, as you said, digital transformation and data.
Yeah, the way, as most of you may know, FDA is a mission-driven organization. So we have the various centers, the drug, biological, food, tobacco. They have done a very good job of focusing on what is required for each of those centers. So if you see the technology, the data, the skills have been developed with that mission in mind. While that has provided some really good value for each of those centers, the events like the pandemic or even our future direction has shown that that model does not work when we have to look at the data and the capabilities at the agency level. So my timing was incredible in terms of witnessing that challenge and then acting as a connective tissue to look at the needs and the white spaces that are between these centers. And we are now primarily focused on that. So it's really a balance between the needs of the agency and making us responsive while continuing to do the work that the centers are doing. So that's really been our focus. So that requires a lot of understanding the positive deviance of, some centers are really good in one area rather than reinventing the wheel. What can we learn from them? And how can we take that work and amplify that for the rest of the agency? That's the kind of mindset that we are operating under, and that's been fairly successful.
I know the FBI is FBI. I know the FDA is getting a lot of good kudos for the work you guys have done, specifically around the pandemic. Let me bring in Juliana from Splunk for a second. Juliana, react a little bit to what you heard from Hannah, what you heard from Ram, but also what you're seeing among clients. How are they handling digital transformation? How is that being impacted by the pandemic?
Yeah, thank you so much. My reaction is excitement and enthusiasm from what we don't, as you know, Jason, but for your listeners, we don't coordinate ahead of time who's going to say what. So it always really inspires me when I hear the leaders and the speakers that you have say the things that I'm seeing, because it's a validation of what's going on across the federal government. In particular, the words I would use are, and then that I heard both Hannah and Ram talk about, are acceleration, reciprocity, execution, an agency level attention or focus on data. This is new. This, I would not have said that a year ago. I think all of us would have been still struggling with, my stakeholders across the agency don't understand the importance of data. They don't understand how much value we can bring to the agency's mission if we harness the power and the goodness of all the data that's across our environment. Things have changed so much in a positive direction. Now, I do hear some, there are people across different agencies who are still fighting back and saying, no, we shouldn't be ignoring the processes that we have in place. We shouldn't be ignoring the policies that we have in place to accelerate or to give a speed pass to things like, these remote work environments. But I think overall, the progress is positive. I hear more and more agency leaders from the business, from the mission, talking about data, and even saying broad terms like it's all about the data. But when that comes from a non-IT leader, someone in like a warfare program, for example, in DoD, or someone from the finance part of the organization in a federal civilian agency, that's progress. That people across agencies are talking about how can we do better to accelerate the tools that we have, the people that we have, the skills that we have to move to a modern future. So what they're saying has just validated what I see and continue to see more of literally every day across the government. And that's a positive thing.
I heard a story from a CIO maybe 3, 4, 5 months ago who mentioned very similar to what you said, Juliana. They got calls from non-IT folks, executives, saying, oh, I never realized how important IT was. And I think you're going down that same path, saying you and probably others like Ram and Hannah and Venus probably are getting the same calls going, I never understood the importance of data like I do today. But is it the pandemic that really made that shift, or did something else happen along with the pandemic that made that shift? Because we've been talking about it's all about the data, I'm sorry, for like 15 or 20 years, it feels like.
Honestly, I'm glad that you asked that follow-on question, because I think it was the pandemic that was the spark. And unfortunately, like many crises, there are horrible things. We don't need to talk about how the world has changed and how our lives have changed in negative ways. But what happened early on when the pandemic started, when we were all watching the news every night about the dashboards and, Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx showing dashboards and data and trends and all this, the average American was paying attention to, oh, now I can see which hospitals have respirator shortages or where the spikes are expected to be. That's predictive analytics. We all know that. The average American probably could have cared less about that before the pandemic, but now it's real for people. Often, this is a lesson I learned in my time in the Pentagon, until something is happening to you, it's not happening. We don't pay attention to things that don't affect us. The pandemic affected us all. The dashboards that we were seeing were helpful. It were informing the public on what they should be paying attention to and how they should be behaving in their personal lives. And that was the spark, I think, that accelerated what we all know as practitioners, the importance of data, to make it matter to everyone else. And honestly, I think it was the gift that we've all been waiting for and hoping for, that everybody else would care about data as much as we do. And now they do. So that's a fantastic opportunity to bring those stakeholders together into conversations about how can we all accelerate toward a modern future.
I love that. I think until something's happening to you, it's not really happening. And then all of a sudden, oh, wow, that data is important. Let me bring in Venus from USDA. Interesting. You're going to come at this from a cybersecurity angle, which also remote work and everything else has probably made your job much more difficult, much more exciting, hopefully. So walk me through digital transformation at USDA. You guys have been on a great path for several years now, but how's the pandemic also impacted that effort? So we're going to ask for two things: digital transformation effort and pandemic, and how they came together.
Good. Well, thank you so much for having me on. And so I want to start kind of with the beginning, right? Yes, USDA, we're following on from our centers of excellence. We had a lot of processes and a lot of success with that as well. But when you hear the word strategy and you hear the word transformation, first of all, strategy makes me think of being prepared. And of course, transformation makes me think about change. And we all remember the series, Who Moved My Cheese? No one likes change. So when we talked about our strategy at USDA for transformation or change, if you would, it was knowing that IT did not own the digital transformation, but really it was a collaboration with the business owners. What can we do to offer value to the customers? What was our, really the foundational conversation that we were having? How do we address the culture? How do we communicate? You remember, as any, project that you get started, it starts with identifying all the stakeholders and make sure that you have all the buy-in. So we had to get that from the business in order to do this. And also we wanted to start with the end in mind as well. It's one thing to say, I would like to save you time. That's good, but save you time to add what value. And it really came to our user experience. And so when we think about improving customer IT experiences, or, I heard you talk about data, cultivating a data-driven culture. Those are two of the things that we definitely focused on in our transformation. One is to your point, Juliana, yes, we have a chief data officer. We stood up over 500 dashboards that would help our agencies even determine how much timber should I order, based on data that we have collected. And that was transformational, for us. In order to do that, we did journey maps to understand, what did it look like from a customer perspective, and identify the changes that we needed to make. So this transformation, for us at the Department of Agriculture, really was a broad swath between all of our different agencies and understanding what the unique needs were as a result of that. And then, of course, from the CISO perspective, my job is to make sure it's done securely. I heard Hannah talk about, fast track ATO. Absolutely, we can do that. First, let's talk about identifying what are the required protections for the data. And once I identify that, I can then address any threats or vulnerabilities. And really, in 48 hours, you can have an authority to operate, because now I'm just going to continuously monitor this environment to make sure that the countermeasures put in place are sufficient. And so while there is a place for a longer time frame for doing the risk management process, I think from a cybersecurity standpoint, that was key for us. Now, if you shift that over to the conversation of how did the pandemic help me, change for me to ensure that the transformation was done securely, where is my data now? It's in the homes of every individual. So how do I protect my data at your house, Juliana, if that's the case? It became really a collaborative effort. One, continuously communicating to the users that they are really one of the sensors for cybersecurity, that they understood that they played a role in cybersecurity, that it wasn't just the cybersecurity professionals and the CISO organization. Number two, it was making sure that I understood the movement of that data and where that data was going to be as a result of the pandemic. We knew how to address, the technology portion for the pandemic. Did we have connectivity? Yes, we had it because we have Office 365. Yes, so you have the ability to do your job in the pandemic environment. We have collaborative platforms, absolutely. But the strategy around cybersecurity from my standpoint was that constant communication and education about it is about the data, and the endpoint. And then it even was, we took it a step further to make sure that we educate them on how to secure themselves at home, because my data was there. And I know that in most homes, we had their, K through 12 was working, was attending school. And so we knew that there were going to be some bandwidth challenges. And so all of those things really came into all of what I call that prepare step. How do we prepare? Because even though the pandemic happened, we did have to take a strategic pause and prepare how we were going to address, transformation in this still environment, because we don't know how long this is going to be our posture. And so again, just to reiterate, it was about the data. and we have what we call an enterprise data analytics platform, which has been established by our chief data officer, making sure that that data was in a secure environment. And then it also became preparation and communications in that collaboration with the stakeholders. So I think that was the strategy that allowed USDA to be successful while in the pandemic.
All right, Venus, a lot to follow up with you on that, but we're going to take a quick break, and we come back where we'll continue our conversation. You're listening to the discussion, Data as a Tool in Digital Transformation and Cybersecurity, sponsored by Splunk on Federal News Network.